It's game jam time. It's been about 5 months since I last participated in a game jam, but I have 2 extra days this weekend, so right now is the perfect time to do one. In the past, whenever I'm doing game jams, I've often had quite lofty goals for my game, and most of the time I end up just barely scraping by and finishing the base game, and having basically no time to polish it. So I'm just gonna do a game jam, no gimmicks this time. I'm gonna focus on making a pretty polished game that feels good to play. And speaking of no gimmicks, I'm just gonna say it, right here at the beginning of the video. Give me subs. Okay, onto the video. The jam I decided to enter in was the My First Game Jam Winter 2021. Now, it technically isn't my actual first game jam, but they allow people of any skill level, so I think it's technically just a name. Also, the game jam is technically over the month, but I'm just going to do mine in 48 hours. The jam has a theme, but it's optional, and I'm not going to follow it, because I already have an idea. I'm going to make a game that's just one long boss fight. The game will be 2D, top-down, and probably pixel art, because I cannot draw. But that's all my plans I had before actually starting, so let's start. I began the jam at 1 PM on Sunday the 17th, so that means I have until Tuesday at 1 PM to be done. I started in the middle of the day because I was busy. But anyway, let's get started. I began by cooking up the sprite for the main character. I'm bad at designing characters, so I'm just going to rip the base design from Enter the Gungeon and make that. So, while my character looks about as original as the latest indie platform game, it serves its purpose well, and that purpose? Murder. But if he wants to get that murder done, then he needs a smooth and luxurious movement system. So I put together a basic movement system in Unity, which I then animated. After that, I decided to create his fine-tuned instrument of death, a sword. Now I could have something like the Legend of Zelda sword where you actually have to hit the enemy with the sword. But that's dumb. And since my character is already a carbon copy of a top-down indie pixel art game with bullet hell and roguelike mechanics, I decided to Frankenstein on an idea I saw in another top-down pixel art indie game with bullet hell and roguelike mechanics. This time I'm respectfully stealing the attack mechanic from the currently in development game called Archvale, which, if you haven't watched the devlogs for, you probably should, as they're pretty nice and you're missing out. But anyways, I made the sword orbit around the player, not unlike the player in my last game jam. Then I created a crappy little attack animation and made it emit a particle whenever you click. It's pretty janky right now, but I'll fix it in a bit because it's dash time. The time of the day where I add a dashing mechanic to my game. There, I did it. After this, I had a somewhat decent movement system, so I decided to move on to polish it up. I added some dust particles that are spawned in every few steps, and they might be my favorite part of the game so far. And they still are. Then I added in a bit of screen shake to attacking and redid its animation, and it's looking quite nice now. Wow, what is this, nuclear throne? Yeah, I'm just hilarious. Anyways, I'm gonna move on to the boss fight. I put together a health system for the player and the boss, and made some incredibly ugly health bars for them. I fixed them later, but wow, these were terrifying. To finish off the day, I did some more pixel art. This time for the first and second stages of the boss. I did some planning during this time, and decided that splitting the boss fight up into 2 stages was a good idea. The first stage will be this big turret thing that sits unmoving in the middle of the stage. And the second stage is a tank that moves towards you. The boss itself has 2 moving pieces, the turret and the base. The turret makes smaller attacks that are aimed at you and happen more often. The base has attacks that take up more space but generally aren't aimed at you. The turret keeps you on your feet, while the boss forces you to weave between its denser patterns and also fills up the screen with bullets, which is definitely necessary, not a waste of bullets. It is the second day, and it is finally time to make the actual boss. Just kidding, I decided to make the room instead. The room's tile set is a pretty basic dungeon tile set that was pretty much just ripped from Heartbeast's tutorial thumbnail. Sorry Heartbeast, I would have watched your whole video, but I've got a boss to make. The first stage of the boss fight was just making a big state machine, using a switch statement. The stages of the boss fight are 1. Idle, where it idles, 2. Activate, where the camera moves to it and it turns to look at you, 3. Stage 1, where it's immobile and attacks you, 4. Transition, where it blows up a bit and becomes a tank. 5. Stage 2, where it is a tank. And 6. Dead, where it no longer is. I got to work making these stages. Idle is literally nothing. Okay, for activate, I had to make the camera able to move between different locations and smooth. To do this, I used something called a lerp. This proceeded to not work until I realized that I had one line in the code messed up. Then it works just fine. Now it was time for stage 1. I decided to make an attack randomizer. So I made that and got to work on the first attack for the boss. This first attack simply sends bullet out in a circle around the turret. I had to make the player take damage and add some bullet objects and get them to actually move in a direction that wasn't just right. But that didn't take too long. Yeah. Riding off the massive wave of success of that first attack, I made a sequel. I call it the Double Burst. It takes what made the original special and turns it up to 2. It even adds a twist to the second part. Now that's what I call a sequel. I also finally gave the turret a role in a spin-off film called Bullet. And now I have attacks. I also have a somewhat playable boss fight, but it can be sort of hard to predict whenever the boss is about to attack. So I added a simple indicator by adding these guns to the sides of the turret that pull back whenever it's about to attack. I also added a shotgun attack to the turret that just shoots 3 bullets with slightly different angles. At this time, the boss fight was feeling very static. Now this wasn't completely surprising. After all, the first stage boss is permanently bedridden. But I decided to add one more unique part to this first stage to make it not just be the second stage, but with no movement. I decided to make a shield that comes up every once in a while and blocks all damage while up. In order to disable the shield, you have to search around for a little shield generator that can spawn at any of 8 points around the boss and destroy it. I also added a brief invincibility period after being hurt and made everything flash white when damaged. So now the first stage is basically finished. So let's do the second. Before starting the second stage, I had to make a transition stage between them. So I just set the boss sprites to its flashing state, added a large helping of screen shake, and added some absolutely disgusting placeholder particles. I made the boss turn into the tank sprite at the end of transition, and made the boss turn to face the player like the turret. Then I made the tank constantly move forward, and there it was. Movement. Now, you'd expect the tank to be about as heavy as the real-world steel human container, but it's actually surprisingly easy to push, so I fixed that. The tank needed a bit more personality, so I decided to add some new attacks. And it covered up its lack of personality by wearing Hot Topic t-shirts and dyeing his hair. The first attack I added was a little tracking missile that steers towards the player and explodes into 4 bullets after a while. Then I decided to add another body attack and made a machine gun attack that is emitted from 2 little guns on the front of the tank. After a bit more bouncing, the second stage was feeling pretty good. The last thing I did before going to sleep was just adding screen shake to whenever you get hurt, blow up the boss, or dash. I woke up at 8:30 and got straight to work. I needed it done by 1 PM, so I needed to work faster than a redditor looking for your post history in order to win an argument about what shade of blue Steve's pants are. I started off by adding a state after killing the boss where the camera goes back to the player and transitions to the currently non-existent windscreen. I then replaced the terrible particles for the boss transition stage with these nice explosion particles. I also made a wall that appears after you walk into the boss room that traps you in there with the boss. Next up was more polished stuff, like a menu and a windscreen. They were both incredibly basic, but I gave the background a tiny amount of movement and it looks okay now. I also made the bullet to get destroyed on collision with the wall. Then I started on player death. I first just made the player turn invisible on death. I then put together 2 pieces of the dead player, which are spawned on death. I also made it sprout endless streams of blood for fun. I made you able to restart by hitting R at any time, and also added some text on screen after death to inform you that you can restart. I also fixed the bug where you can move while dead, which was an interesting one. Next up, I added a line renderer between the shield generator and the boss. It doesn't look amazing, but it helps communicate the fact that the shield generator is making the shield, and also makes it easier to locate the shield generator off screen. Finally, I added a bit of fade in and fade out to the room transitions. I was getting down to the last hour at this point, so I decided to just add music and sound and be done. I added some music from Evan King of Danny fame, and made some sound effects using SFXR. But then, something tragic happened. I encountered a bug. This bug was incredibly annoying to try to fix, but also would basically ruin the game if it was triggered. This bug altered values like how long to animate the sword attack, how long and fast to make the dash, and how often the boss attacks, and it made them basically random. This could be disastrous, because it would completely ruin the player experience with the game. Sure, the boss fight could be great, but if the boss attacks super slow, or your attacks don't work properly, then it wouldn't be very much fun to play. I tried to fix this bug for a very long time. I would switch up the values in the script over and over again, but when I fixed one value, the others would seemingly be messed up, and then I'd run it again and they'd all be completely different. And to make matters worse, the values were different between the full screen mode and the smaller mode in the editor, and the issue still existed in the builds of the game, and to make things even worse, I had less than an hour left. I eventually decided to ask around in Discord, and then I got an answer that made me feel really stupid. Duh. I was subtracting from these cooldown values every frame in Update, but Update varies based on the frame rate of the game. The game was sometimes running at different frame rates in the editor because the editor is weird and the full screen must have a different frame rate as well. I just ended up moving all these cooldown values into fixed update instead of update because that updates at a standard time throughout the entire game no matter what frame rate you're running at. Then I just messed around with these values a bit and got them working. And finally, I completed the game with... Well, actually, I have something to admit. I didn't finish the game in 48 hours. It was more like 49 hours. So this game jam was officially failed. While the game jam failed, I think the game I ended up with in the end was pretty good. I submitted it a few hours later on Tuesday, and I guess I technically lied about making a game in 48 hours for the title of this video, but 49 hours sounds dumb, so screw you, it's staying at 48. Overall, I think this might be the best game jam I've done. In the past, my game jam games have always ended up half-baked, mostly in the polish department, but I think the focus on things like movement and screen shake ended up making this one a lot more fun to play in the end. I might be a fraud and a failed game jammer, but at least I'm not a Danny clone. Anyway, I should release a devlog of my game Carlson Combat next week, so be sure to subscribe for that. Bye.